Welcome to the Top Order podcast. In a golden era for Australian Test cricket, our next guest was a standout in more ways than one. A stellar Shield career over a decade or more finally earned him a breakthrough at the tender age of 34. But don't worry, he more than made up for lost time, amassing 69 wickets in just 18 tests at a superb average of 26. Whether you're a seamer or a spinner, that's an impressive average right there. This guy was both at test level, no less. And that's quite an achievement in itself too. Colin Miller, welcome to the Top Order podcast.
Thank you, guys. Nice to hear a nice voice for a change. I've been stuck at home for 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, look, it certainly increased our ability to get guests on the show over the course of the lockdown. You are the first from Las Vegas, Nevada. So tell us what you're doing in Las Vegas, first and foremost, a bit of a journey for a cricketer.
Yeah, well, I've been here for going on 13 years now. I married an American girl, and she was living in Vegas at the time when we got married. So this is where I ended up. I work for the Marriott hotel chain on the vacation side of things, and the whole town is shut at the moment. There's nothing happening in Las Vegas. There's no one on the streets. The strip is empty for the first time it's ever been empty, and it's very, very quiet here.
And is there an end in sight for that? Is there a time limit on that, I guess, lockdown or isolation period?
It depends who you listen to, but in our industry, we're looking at mid-July, and then you got to think, well, by the time that happens, who's going to be prepared to travel again? Who's going to have any money to travel? Because there's 15 million people just lost their job in the last 2 weeks. So this, for Las Vegas in particular, it could mean that we don't really have a summer season this year. Just have our regular people in Las Vegas hopefully be able to get out and start going to have a drink somewhere in restaurants and shops and do the normal day-to-day things that we can't do at the moment. Brilliant.
Well, look, we've covered off COVID. I think we want to talk about happier things and your cricketing career. So, look, I want to kick off with the nickname. I guess you played in an era of amazing Australian nicknames. So, how did you get the nickname? Do you remember the sort of genesis of it?
Yeah, it's I love Tone Loc, a rapper from back in the day, and I used to play his music all the time. And Funky Colin Medina was one of the songs I really liked to play a lot. And when you've had 15 or 20 Scotch and Cokes, Funky Colin Medina and Funky Colin Miller sort of blend in together. So it was really Darren Berry, the wicketkeeper in South Australia at the time, that gave me that moniker.
Yeah, look, always the wicket keepers that come up with the good nicknames.
Yeah.
So getting into your Shield cricket career, Colin, you started in 85, 86 for Victoria. Is that right? Played a couple of games and then moved over to South Australia. Yeah. So what took you from your home state to South Australia?
Yeah, I think I just played the one game for Victoria at the MCG. Then I was 12th man, I think, for 2 in a row. And that were the last 3 games of the season. And then at the start of the next season, I got dropped from the squad completely. I'd been in the squad for 3 or 4 years already and then was dropped. So I wanted to play first-class cricket. I'd been to South Australia on a quick vacation the summer before, and I liked what I saw over there, and I thought there was an opportunity to play cricket over there as well. So I went over there and got myself a job working in a newspaper selling advertising, and found myself a cricket club, a Sturt Cricket Club, and then moved over with no guarantees. But in the first season, I was in the state squad, and then that next year I played my first state game.
And was Shield cricket enough to make a living at that time? Like, what was it like, sort of mid-'80s, trying to juggle a full-time job, club cricket, Shield cricket? What was it like as a career option for you at that time?
Yeah, you had to have a job back in those days. So I worked out pretty quickly that I wanted to play cricket professionally. So I spent the next 10 years back and forward to England, playing in the leagues up in Lancashire most of the time. I spent a couple of years in Holland as well. So I really just made cricket my full-time job.
And that must have been quite a hyper-competitive period of time in that sort of Shield or domestic scene in Australia. What was it like being you started out as a pace bowler, right? What was it like being a pace bowler in amongst a plethora of genuinely good pace bowling options for Australia in the late 80s?
Yeah, there was a lot of bowlers around, and that was one of the benefits of being in South Australia, was if you could bowl medium pace and get wickets in Adelaide back in those days, you could probably get wickets anywhere in Australia. So it was a good learning ground to bowl pace on Adelaide Oval, because it was traditionally a wicket that, unless you were super quick, you had to work really hard, and then it became a spinner's track after the second or third day. So I think it was good breeding for me, a good training, and set me on the way to having some really good seasons. I had a couple of good years in South Australia. I got over 40 wickets in a couple of years in a row. So I was doing pretty well for myself.
And how long were you at South Australia before you made the move to Tasmania? What brought that on?
Almost 4 years in South Australia, and really their direction changed. They wanted to play two spinners. We had Tim May in our team, and Maisie was just an outstanding spin bowler. I used to love watching Maisie bowl. He's really the reason that I wanted to start bowling off spin myself. And then Peter McIntyre was heading over, the leg spinner, and they wanted to play two spinners in South Australia. So it was me that was going to get to be left out of the team more and more. So I still thought I had the opportunity or the ability to play first-class cricket. So I spoke to Greg Shippert, who was coaching Tassie at the time, and we had a beer one night, and he said, if you want to come down to Tassie. There's no guarantees again, but we'll have a look at you. Find yourself a club team and see what you want to do. So I did the same thing I did when I moved to South Australia. I got myself a job in a bar down there, serving beers, and found a club, Lindisfarne. We're a brand new club in the competition. I became their player.
And how long was it before you started to actually bowl spin in the nets? Did you try it out in club games, or how did that come about?
I always bowled spin in the nets. My whole life I'd been bowling spin in the nets, so I always enjoyed it. In the UK, I had a lot of opportunity to bowl spin, never in a game, but in a lot of net situations again. And on my own, I'd go out in the midweek and do a centre wicket practice on my own, set up some stumps and some little cones and try to get my drift and my spin working there in the dip. And so I knew I'd been bowling spin for probably 10 or 12 years before I started doing it in the first class cricket. What made you
make the switch to bowling spin in first class cricket?
Well, in Tassie, we didn't really have a spinner. And Tasmania, the Bellerive Oval was even flatter than Adelaide Oval. So as a medium pacer in Tassie, it was hard for us to bowl teams out with just the 4 medium pacers that we had. We needed that variety of a spinner. And so it took me a few weeks to convince David Boone that I could do the job for him. He gave me a bowl in the second innings of a game against the Victorians, and I picked up a couple of wickets bowling offies, and it just went on from there.
And pardon the pun, but was that a pivotal moment in the trajectory of your career?
It was the one that made my career in all reality. The next season, I bowled spin and medium pace full time for the whole year, and bowled over 770 overs in the Shield season that year. Took 70 wickets, and by the end of that year, I was playing for Australia.
You mentioned all those wickets, and obviously, in my research, I found that you actually broke a 63-year-old record for most wickets in a Shield season. Was that special to you? Are you a stats guy?
No, I'm not really, but I still like to have that record. It's tattooed on my leg, so hopefully no one breaks it too soon. It's actually tattooed on the right cheek of my ass, but so hopefully no one breaks that record. Chad Sayers got pretty close a couple of years ago in South Australia. He was in the high 50s. But it's a record that probably won't get broken, because in reality, if someone looks like breaking it, they should be playing for Australia by that time of the year. It'll be a young guy that probably gets close to breaking it, or it'll be an older guy like me. I was 34 when I got those wickets, so I think it's a difficult one to break these days. But just, Chuck Fleetwood Smith held the record before me. He got those wickets, 63 of them in 5 games. So he was going all right back in those days.
And just in terms of, I guess, switching it up between swing and seam and spin, who made that decision? Was that the skipper that would say, hey, actually, let's change this up? Or would you have an inkling that you were more likely to get someone out in a particular situation? How did that work?
A lot of it depended on how flat the track was. If I was opening the bowling, I'd start bowling my slow balls in the second or third over. Because my slower balls are like a fast off spinner. And if I was getting a bit of grip with that, I'd start winking at the captain and say, Booney, I think we might get a bit of turn out of this track today. So how about we start bowling some spin?
Well, would have been good for the over rates as one thing as well.
Oh, we got through a ton of overs in a day, yeah.
I remember you, Colin, I watched you a lot on TV. That late 90s period was kind of where I grew into watching cricket a lot. And I remember watching you on the TV and thought, like, here's a guy who's always enjoying himself on the field. You always looked like you were having fun. Not afraid to express yourself, both on the field and with your look and so forth. Is that what it felt like for you? Did it feel comfortable being out there on the cricket field?
Oh, it was awesome fun. When you think what the job is, you get to play cricket with another 12 or 14 guys on the squad. When you're playing for Australia, you get to travel around the world for 10 months of the year with 15 or 16 guys who are all your mates. And I mean, if you can't have fun doing that, playing in front of anywhere from 100,000 people in India to 80,000 people at the MCG, if you're not enjoying doing that, then you're probably in the wrong job.
And Colin, just before we move on to your Australian career, I just wanted to, as a New Zealander, when I was growing up watching the game there, we just hear these stories about guys that are playing so many years of state cricket and just piling on all these runs and just the amazing Aussie depth. Like we'd hear about Law and Lehman and all these guys who might have played like 100 tests for New Zealand. Was the Sheffield Shield cricket as good as those stories suggest?
Yeah, it was. Back in you just named a couple of them, but had Jamie Siddons, Jamie Cox, Michael Divenuto would have played a lot. Dean Hills from Tasmania, Greg Blewett was around in those days. Stuart Law, everyone in New South Wales, Western Australia had Mike Valletta and Langer, and just about everyone in Western Australia was making runs for fun. It was a really good time to play cricket. I've lost touch. I don't want to say it's better than it is now because I have been out of Australia for 13 years. So I don't know what first-class cricket's like in Australia now, but it was certainly a strong time of first-class cricket in Australia, and I think that was reflected with the international team at the time as well.
Yeah, and last question on your Shield stuff. Is it true that you bowled non-stop all day in a Shield game?
I did once in Hobart. Yeah, I bowled 51 overs.
Jeez.
From the one end. I opened the bowling, turned to spin after about 45 minutes, bowled most of the day bowling spin, then took the second new ball, and then bowled another 4 overs of that, and then ended the day bowling spin again.
Yeah. Was that a fun day? I suppose, I'm an off spinner as well, so I enjoyed bowling a lot of overs, but maybe it's not if you're bowling to those kind of characters.
Oh, no, I just love bowling. Like spin, honestly, after you've bowling medium pace, and I had a long run up too. So at Bellerive, I always had the ball into the wind in Tassie. So off the long run was hard work. So bowling spin was pretty easy, really. I was pretty much a gym rat, so I was always super fit. So just rolling a home over off 4 steps, I could do that for 50, 60 overs a day.
So you mentioned the gym there, Colin. I guess that there was a sort of a group of players in that Australian side that you would have said were sort of fitness freaks from the outset, and I suppose the professionalism in cricket at that point was probably led by the Australian team. What was the mix like in the dressing room there? At that point, you'd got someone like Warne who enjoyed a cheeseburger or two, and I guess a number of other players that perhaps sort of lived a little bit of a different lifestyle. How did you balance that?
Well, for me, I just liked going to the gym. So I liked working out. I didn't so much enjoy the running part of things, but I did it just because you needed it. It was essential. But the time that I got into the Australian team, you had guys like Matthew Hayden and Andrew Simons and Justin Langer, and these probably the new breed of guys are coming through who were seriously into their fitness. Probably as more than maybe Steve, Mark Wall were. They weren't known to go to the gym too often, just use their natural fitness and natural ability. But I think the game was probably in the transition stage then, in the late 90s, early 2000s, of the money was starting to come into the game, particularly with the IPL as it was about to start mid-2000s. And from then on, guys realised if you wanted to make a lot of money, you had to be fit and be able to get on the park as often as possible.
So you obviously mentioned that, season 97-98 with, nearly 70 wickets. Did you know that Australia call was coming, or did you kind of think you'd never potentially make Test cricket despite some of that Shield success at that age?
I, without being arrogant, I thought I was the best off spinner in Australia. There were other guys being picked ahead of me for the Australian team, and I thought I was better than at the time. I thought getting the 67 Shield wickets in that year was going to be a pretty good chance with a couple of subcontinent tours coming up. There was a Pakistan and India tour, or India first and then Pakistan. And I didn't get picked on the Indian tour, but I got picked on the Pakistan tour. So it was probably a good start tour to go on for me because being in Pakistan, the wickets were friendly towards spin, and it gave me an opportunity to show what I could do.
And what was it like walking into that side in 98 with, I guess, a lot of those personalities and the players that you've mentioned in that dressing room? How overawed did you feel, if at all?
Not really, because I'd been playing first-class cricket for 13 years already. So I played against all of these guys. And back in those days, all the international players played as much Shield cricket as they possibly could. So you were always playing against the Wars and all the other guys. And I played under 16 cricket against Stephen and Mark as well. So I'd known them for many years. And so to walk into the rooms, I felt quite comfortable. Mark Taylor was my first captain. He made me feel very, very comfortable in that Pakistan tour. And I think when you get your first wicket, you sort of, the boys get around you and you get to sing the team song after the first victory, and things are good from there on.
And you had an amazing attack at that point. You've got obviously the likes of Warne and McGrath and Fleming and Brett Lee. What were the instructions to you coming into that side from Tubby and then probably later Steve Waugh in terms of the expectations on your role?
Just attack. I was in the team for a reason, to take wickets. So it wasn't just my job to bowl dot balls all day. I was there to get wickets. So, and that's nice when a captain says that too. They have the faith in you to go out and do what you've been doing for the last couple of years in Shield cricket, and we'll support you here as well. And both Mark and Stephen did exactly that for me.
And what was the contrast between Taylor and Waugh as skippers? What would you say their relative strengths and weaknesses were?
I think my impression of the two guys was Mark Taylor made it. It was his team. It was clear it was his team. He was going to make all the decisions, whether we battled the bowl. He was going to set the fields. He was going to make anything that went on the field was going to be his idea, and which was fine. He's the captain of Australia. You can do what you like. And then when Stephen took over, it became a little bit more inclusive. I think he wanted advice from senior players in the team. He wanted advice from his bowlers rather than him just setting fields and say, you bowl to that field. He sort of gave you more freedom to set your own fields a little bit, which as a bowler, and particularly as a spin bowler, is a good luxury to have a captain that understands spin.
Awesome. And just before we, I guess, move a little bit further forward in your career, Colin, I'm a keeper. Healy was my hero. I think you were the guy that gave him his dismissals world record. I think Wasim Akram caught behind. Did you know that? Did you all know that at the time? And did that have any sort of, I guess, particular sense of pride for you as well?
Yeah, I had that picture in my bar, so it's signed by Heels. Yeah, the boys are always aware of any records that are coming up or achievements from anyone in the team. So we're all out there, and so for me to be a part of that was fantastic feeling for me. And the fact I said I got a hold of that photo and sent it up to Heels, and he signed it back and sent it back to me, so it hangs on my wall now.
Awesome.
Colin, you started your Test cricket career against Pakistan, and life was pretty rosy for the Australian side then, and you were in a golden run throughout your career of not too many losses or draws, mostly wins. Was it all rosy in the dressing room, or was it kind of as cutthroat an environment off the field as the opposition experienced when they were playing against you?
No, we were pretty good in the rooms. We knew how to celebrate after a win. We knew how to celebrate when we had a few days coming up that were going to be off for us, off days. There was, when you got that much talent in one room, and then when confidence gets high amongst a group that talented, it was going to be hard for anybody to beat us for a period of time. And we went through 16 tests where no one could beat us. So Warne made a famous comment during the time when John Buchanan was coach that, the coach is what you go to the game in. We didn't really need a coach. And to a degree, he was probably right, because with the ability in that team, we really could look after ourselves. But I still think there was a place for John Buchanan. I thought he did a lot of the background work for the team as far as planning. But when it comes to going out in the field and playing a game, it's the individual's talent that shines through. And during that 2.5, 3 year period where the team was almost unbeatable, it was a great feeling to be involved with.
So it's a great segue there to Shane Warne. So him and Stuart McGill were both around the national setup during your time there. What was the atmosphere like between you three?
It was fine. Stuart and I got on really well together, and I'd known Warne for many years. I met Shane when I was playing in South Australia, and he was in the academy team over there. So I'd known Warne for 15, 20 years almost already. So he was those two are just exceptional talents. Unfortunately, they were both in the same era, because I have no doubt McGill would have got 400 or 500 wickets as well if he was playing as the main spinner in the team. The times that they did play together, it probably didn't work out very well. Warne seemed to work better with an off spinner at the other end. When he had Tim May in the team, he did really, really well early on. And then the couple of games that we did play together, he had success as well. I think with Stewie, they saw Stewie turned the ball more than any other leg spinner I've ever seen, and a lot of players were just playing miss at him all day long. Warne was a lot more subtle with his turning and angles that he bowled from, whereas Stewie in his early career was really just an outright big spinner of the ball.
Is it right that the three of you played a test together at the SCG?
I think we did. It was myself, Stewie, and Warne, and I want to say maybe Kasperwich was the only quick we picked, and I think I opened the bowling for about 3 overs, and then said to Stephen, I think this wicket's going to turn a bit for us, and off we went. I think Stewie got wickets, and I think I might have got 2 wickets, and I think Stewie got a bunch in that game, if I'm not wrong.
And you were famously picked ahead of Warne in that 4th test in the West Indies, which obviously got a lot of headlines. But that was a super eventful match for you, right? I read that you dropped Brian Lara off Glenn McGrath and Glenn broke his toe kicking a wall in frustration.
True story, yeah. Well, the highlight of the game obviously was my batting. It wasn't my bowling.
Yeah.
And if you've been on YouTube, you've seen my famous innings against Curtly Ambrose.
Yeah.
So that's all we really need to talk about that test match.
You hit him into the jail, I heard.
I actually hit him out of the ground twice in front of square.
I did see he bowled you quite a nice bouncer to follow up.
Yeah, the third one I got a top edge off the top of the bat, off the top of my head, one bounce into the side screen. And Steve Ward walked down and said, he was batting with me at the time, and said, that nearly killed you then. I said, yeah, but I saw it early.
Brilliant. And there was a good celebration afterwards.
Yeah, there's a great bar across the road from that ground, and there was a whole bunch of Australian supporters that were following us around the Caribbean on that trip. And I think I spent maybe 2 or 3 hours drinking some rum and cokes with the boys over in that bar.
So there can't have been many other internationals that have bowled pace and spin at that level. Like, yeah, think of Sobers and Simons, and that's pretty good company. But you used to change even between an over, didn't you, I think?
Within an over, yeah. The most famous one was actually in New Zealand, if that's the one you're referring to. I fancied myself against any left-hander, so I was bowling to Stephen Fleming, offies, and I can't remember the name of the guy who they changed ends.
Skippy Sinclair.
Yeah,
Matthew Sinclair. Yeah,
sinkers. Yeah, it was sinkers, and then so after I think the 3rd or 4th ball of the over, they got a single. I went back for the long run, and then first ball got sinkers LBW.
Yeah, brilliant. And do you reckon your seam bowling background was helpful to spin bowling? Because you bowl quite quickly compared to other spinners.
Yeah. I played baseball as a young kid. I was a pitcher. And the grip that I used to throw my curveball, because I had really small hands when I was young. So instead of just the 2 finger that you would use to curve the ball, I had to really put my whole hand around the ball. So when I was bowling fast, my slow ball I would drop it back into my hand when I was behind my back. And that was just a slow off spinner. And then when I started bowling off spin, it was just exactly the same grip as I'd been using since my baseball days. So it wasn't the traditional split 2 fingers an off spinner would use. It was really all my fingers on the ball. And just the pace I bowled at was just the natural pace that I bowled at. Some guys toss it up. I didn't believe you had to toss it up to get above the batsman's eyes. I'm 6 foot tall, and when I let go of the ball from 8 feet, it's already above the batsman's eyes. It goes up out of your hand naturally, and then it's going to dip towards the end. So my whole theory on bowling spin was not to try to beat the guy in the flight, was to try to beat him from 15 feet away from his bat. So by that I mean by beating him with the ball dipping or drifting away from him.
And so we'll move to 2000 and 2001, where it was just a golden year for Australian cricket, I guess. And some people say, it might have been their best side ever, and you were the Test Player of the Year that year. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I watched the clip of the awards night, and well, for one, it was really like a dramatic, drawn-out process. Was that really weird?
It was, because I had no idea I was going to be in the voting. And on table, I think we had might have been Michael Slater and Flemmo and Casper and Darren Lehman, and maybe even Greg Blewett might have been on there. And we were just drinking. We were playing drinking games. Every time someone got a vote on the table, you had to drink what was in front of you. So I'd been through about a bottle and a half of red wine during the voting period because everyone on the table kept getting votes, and then it came down to a tie between myself and Michael Slater, and Slats was sitting on the table right next to us, so we were having another drink, toasting each other.
Yeah.
And then they did the count back, and then it ended up being me that got the victory. So it's like when you get pulled over by the cops when you're speeding, you get sober instantly. and I was in the back of the room as well, so they didn't expect me to be walking to the stage too often. So it took me probably a couple of minutes to get my jacket on and make sure I felt like I was sort of could walk towards the stage and then get up there and then to have a chat with Richie Ben for a few minutes was a bit of a thrill as well.
Yeah, you were quite emotional during that speech. I mean, did the award obviously meant a lot to you at that time?
Yeah, well, I think for any player, when you win awards in your life for anything that's voted for by your peers, I think those things are always really important to people in a team sport. It's nice to win other awards that you have nothing to do with, but when it's a team award, which really what that is, it's voted on by some of the media that follow the team around the world, and then primarily by the team and the management within the team. So that was a great award to win.
And I noticed that you said thank you to your dogs, Richie and Benno. Is that actually the name of your dogs?
They were my two dogs, Richie and Benno. Yeah, so that got a bit of a laugh. Unfortunately, they passed away a couple of years after that. But yeah, that was true. We had those two dogs for a long time.
Fantastic. And the great man was the one gave you the award. That's awesome. So I mean, just thinking about your career at that point, you had an epic battle with Brian Lara at times, and was he the best batsman that you bowled to?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly at international level, and I've said this before, at first class level, there was two guys that I had trouble ever getting out in the whole time I played against them was Darren Lehman and Greg Blewett. When they were in their prime, when I'd left South Australia, they were just coming onto the scene. When I was down in Tasmania for the next 8 years, every time I had to go to Adelaide or they came to Hobart, both of them made a truckload of runs against us. And those two guys were phenomenal to bowl to. Brian Lara, I got out a lot. In that one summer in Australia, I got him out 6 times. But I think I got him in Adelaide, he was 185. I got him in Melbourne, he was 150. Yeah. I think he just got tired of hitting me around most of the time.
But I mean, all offies love bowling to lefties. But I mean, what gave you more pleasure, squaring up and nicking off a left-hander like that, or going through the gate of a righty? I got one perfect offie to a righty in Sydney against the English team back in whatever year that was, 2000. And then the one pitching on leg and getting the outside edge to the left-hander was always a great one as well. Getting one to spin one across the lefties. But really, anytime I got a wicket, I was pretty happy.
That West Indian series was the blue hair incident, if I remember correctly, Colin. Is that right? Yeah,
that was in Sydney. Yeah.
Yeah. The only reason I mention that is that team haircuts were a feature of my junior rep career. I guess that the reason I remember that the most was on commentary. You might not have heard it, but Bill Lawry was completely stumped. He had no idea what to say, and I think Courtney Walsh was in the same kind of mode. What brought the idea for the blue hair on?
A variety of things. It's funny. I get sent that video probably once a month from people on Facebook who say, "Have you ever seen yourself in this video?" Like, I've never seen it before. I've seen it 1,000 times. And it's Michael Holding is commentating, and right, Bill Lawry doesn't know what to say. Michael Holding is sort of just in shock as well. I was having a pretty good year, and in my own mind, I was going to get picked in the one-day team. I never played one-day cricket for Australia, and that's one of the things I always wanted to do was play one-day cricket with the coloured clothing on, under lights at the MCG or the SCG with a full house. So I was going to, if I got picked for Australia, I was going to colour my hair during the one-day series. But the morning of the afternoon of the first day, Steve Bernard, the team manager, came in and said, "Boys, I'm going to name the squad for the one-day series, so you can let all your wives and girlfriends know, make some plans for the next month or so. You're going to be on the road." And he went through the whole list of the team, and I wasn't on it. I thought, "Oh, damn! I thought I was a cert to play this series." So I rang the hotel and got the concierge to call a hairdresser in for me and just tell him to bring some hair dye. And she just happened to bring in blue on that night. So I had a mate staying with me for that week up in Sydney, just for Melbourne. He was just up there watching me play the game. And we sat in the room drinking Crown Lagers for about 4 hours while my hair went from the natural brown that it was to peroxide blonde first, and then from the peroxide blonde to the blue electric. It was the bluest thing I'd ever seen when I first took the towel off my head. And in the hotel we stayed at, there's a wall of mirrors in the living room, and I remember taking the towel off my head and looking at my blue hair and thinking, oh my God, I might have gone too far this time. My mate Paul just fell off his chair laughing, and I started to get concerned. So I didn't tell anyone I was going to do it. No one in the team knew I was going to do it. The next morning, I jumped on the team bus and sat right down the back with a baseball hat on and my collar turned up in my tracksuit, and didn't go out for a warm-up, but I stayed in the change rooms and got a rub and had a smoke and a can of Coke. And Steve Waugh came back in for the morning rev talk and said, okay, boys, they're 9 down. We just got to get 1 wicket. We can get out of here. And I think it was McGrath and Casper were going to open the bowling, and I put my hand up and said, it's target, mate, I got to bowl the first over. And he's going, what are you talking about? I said, I took my hat off and said, mate, I spent $300 on this hair last night. I need someone to see it. And there's 50,000 people outside there today. So the target changed the team plan, said, hey, you've done the hard yards, Cole, you can bowl the first over.
And was there any temptation for any of your teammates to follow suit and join in the movement?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I mean, the hair.
The year before, before I played my first test, myself and Jason Gillespie and Dean Hills had been on an Australian A tour through England and Scotland together, and we'd all dyed our hair. We'd all bleached our hair white over there for some stupid. I think one of them lost a bet, so I just went along for the day and got my hair bleached as well. So that's where it all started, really, back in the Australia A days.
The hair, the earring, was that a way of expressing your individuality and flair? And like that era of Australian cricket was becoming increasingly professional, and I think maybe from the outside it looked a little bit sanitized. Was that your way of like kind of expressing your individuality in that increasingly professional environment?
I got my ear pierced the day I quit work when I was living in South Australia. When I decided to become a professional, I went out, I got my ear pierced because I didn't think I had to be in an office again the rest of my life. And then the hair was, no, not really. It was just, I suppose I had a reputation of a guy that liked to go out and party and drink a lot and blah, blah, blah. But that was just a public perception of me. What people didn't know was all the work I did in the gym and all the running I did outside of that. And if I did have a night out and the drink, the next day it'd be a 10K run, it'd be my punishment. I'd go and punish myself for a day. And you've got to have some personality. Really, you're playing international sport. You're becoming famous for the first time, and people want to know who you are, not just the guy they see on TV. So I didn't mind sharing my personality. I didn't mind mixing with the public after a game and having a beer with some guys who wanted a beer with me. So it was all just part of the fun. Unfortunately, and remember, it's all before cell phones really came out. And not everyone's carrying a camera in their pocket, and you could go out and have some fun and no one's really going to know about it. The media back in those days would leave you alone when you're having a beer. Most of the time on tour, I wouldn't leave the hotel during a whole game. I'd really just sit in the bar most nights with all the journalists and have a beer until 11 o'clock at night and then go to bed. I wasn't really a guy that liked to go out during games, but I liked to have a drink. So I just sat in the bar in the hotel most of the times. And
is it true that you famously met the Queen with a pink hairdo? Is that a true story?
It is. I forgot she was coming in, and I'd had red hair for the week before the Lord's Test, and I wasn't playing in the Test match, and the red hair had started to fade. It looked a bit like fairy floss. And when we got to the ground, and Steve Bernard, the team manager, said, "Right, you ready for the Queen's coming in today?" I thought, "Oh my God, I look like this. I look ridiculous." But she did speak to me. She did say nice hair when she took my hand, or when I took her hand and bowed. So at least the Queen spoke to me. That's one thing.
And look, that's probably enough to talk about your hair. But what about the thing that covered it, the baggy green? There's so many famous stories about how much players loved it and who wore it everywhere and slept in it, and others who didn't think much of it. Where were you on that baggy green spectrum?
I wore it as often as I could, but it does get uncomfortable sometimes, especially when you're a bowler and you're sweating a lot. I understand why Warne didn't like to wear it. Warne would always wear it for the first session, then they'd be back onto the floppy after that. I was pretty much the same. I'd wear it for the first session, and then I'd be in the floppy, would get on. But I always put it on when we started to celebrate a win because I wanted to make it look like it'd been worn a few times. So just had a lot of beer tipped on it, and a lot of other drinks tipped on it. My mum put it in the washing machine once, which nearly gave me a heart attack.
Oh no!
But it came out all right. And I had to get some more beer tipped on it to make it look real again.
So it's on the mantelpiece at the moment?
It actually sits in the closet in my bedroom. I've never really got a proper presentation case for it. So it's just in my bedroom, in the closet.
So just moving on to a few current events, I read a story about you having tickets to that 2017 concert in Las Vegas where the shooting occurred. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and also what the fallout was like for the strip?
Yeah, my wife works for MGM, and MGM owned that plot of land where that concert was being held. As I said earlier, I played baseball as a young kid, and early that year, my wife had been to one of the MGM big functions that they had for their staff, and they have auction nights and all that sort of stuff. And she'd bought a couple of tickets to go and watch Boston Red Sox play baseball at home. And we just decided that it was the last game of the year for baseball, and they had to win to make it in the playoffs. So we flew to Boston that weekend instead of going to the concert. We drove and had a great time too. If you've never been to that field in Boston, it's unbelievable. We got home at about 7 o'clock that night, I want to say, from memory. And we were driving, if you know Vegas at all, the airport's right near the Strip, basically. It's almost across the road. And we knew there was stuff going on in town, so we came the long way around up to Sahara. We just moved into a new house close to the Strip. So we're only 5 minutes away from the Strip now. There was a lot of police cars and sirens and stuff going on the Strip, which is not unusual for Las Vegas. But we got home and we sort of got our bags out of the car and sort of played with the dogs for a minute and then turned the TV on. And of course, that's all we saw. We spent the next 3 or 4 hours just watching this thing unfold with this guy shooting into 22,000 people with automatic weaponry. It was just devastating. It was just an unbelievable feeling that came across the city, and the groundswell of mourning and just and fear that came across this whole state, because it's just not anywhere that you would have thought this was ever going to happen. But in hindsight, it's the perfect place for it to happen, because we had all these big outdoor concert arenas that were being used all the time. But you just don't think something like that's ever going to happen to a city that you live in.
Yeah, it's horrible. All right, just bringing it back to cricket. What's your involvement like in cricket now, these days?
Zero. I watch a bit of it. I get up in the morning and I read the Australian newspapers. I read Cricket Info all the time. I'm on there a lot to see what's happening in the game, because I do get rung to do some media work occasionally. So I've got to be able to talk about what's actually happening in the modern day. I just watched that series on the Australian team called The Test. I binge watched that in the first week of shutdown. And it's the first time that I've ever missed playing cricket was after I watched that series on the Australian team for almost 20 years. So it got me motivated to want to play cricket again.
I'm sure. There was talk that you were close to landing the job as the Bangladeshi national coach.
Yeah, I interviewed for that, and they flew into Melbourne back in the day, and we interviewed over it. I think my asking price was too much for them in the end. I wanted to make sure if I was going to go and live in Bangladesh, and that's what it was going to be, I needed to be able to get back to Australia as often as possible. And I needed to make it worthwhile financially for me to go and do that. And I wasn't asking a lot in today's money, but back then, for an emerging country, what I asked for was probably too much. It's something I honestly would love to have done. I thought my interview went really well, but in the end they decided to go another way. But that's really the only foray into coaching that I really had. I got offered a position here in America to help out with the American team, but that sort of fell by the wayside as well, due to really the trouble with the American setup at the time. Wasn't really financially strong, and I work full time over here now, so I couldn't really give up this job to go and do a job where there was no guarantee I was ever going to get paid.
Do you see that as a sort of path for the future for you, coaching?
No, I think I've been out of the game too long now and away from the game. It has changed. I think I still have a lot to offer. I think anyone that's played a lot of cricket, you don't forget how to play and what you did when you were playing, but the opportunity just is probably not going to arise unless it was really just in a support role, as maybe as a mentoring role, maybe in some sort of team setup. But as far as outright coaching, that's not really been an ambition.
So the 2020 game. So I guess that's a game where there's flair required, and someone with a presence like yourself, I think, would have excelled at that game.
I think I would have done all right in 2020. Stood me down the ground, it was a spin, 2 overs of medium pace, and go another slog. And then 3 hours and the game's done. I think I would have done all right in that game, and I'm really, in a way, I'm sad I never got a chance to play it. I did play 2020 cricket in the US a couple of years after I retired. There was three very wealthy Indian gentlemen, American, living in the US, who wanted to introduce this 2020 game into America before I'd even heard of it. And they brought a whole bunch of retired international cricketers together, and we spent almost 2.5 months traveling around the US playing on minor league baseball grounds, playing 2020 cricket, amazingly enough. And there was one game on the 4th of July we played up in New Jersey, and there was like almost 5,000 American fans came out to watch us play that game. So 2020 is a game that's going to take off in the US. It's what's going to make US cricket successful in the future. They seem to have a pretty good setup now. They've got themselves sorted out. They have a really nice ground over in Florida. So hopefully now they get the opportunity for their ICC backing that they've had for the last couple of years now. They get their act together, and I think this is a game that could take off for Americans in a big way.
Yeah, I definitely think it will take off soon. It's that kind of market, isn't it?
Well, the thing that was the Americans that we met that day on the 4th of July, well, they couldn't believe that we could hit a ball after it had already bounced in front of us, and then hit it as far as we could, catch a ball without a glove, throw a ball as far as a baseballer could throw a baseball. They just didn't know what cricket was, and they obviously had never seen the game. So I think that was part of the interest factor for them, and the fact that the game only goes for supposedly 2 hours and 45 minutes, whereas baseball can be a 4 or 5 hour game. Football goes forever. Basketball, you got to be a real basketball fan to enjoy basketball, but even that game drags on now with all the time out. So this 2020 cricket is really what's made for the fans, and that's why I think American fans will really love it when it takes off.
I guess, T20 would be that gateway, I think, for the American audience. Do you think you would ever see the American team getting into the longer format or any first class cricket, or do you think it would be limited just to that, 3.5 hour, hot dog and sort of baseball concept?
Yeah, I think that's the future of cricket, unfortunately. I think you'll have your traditional test match countries will play test match cricket, for the rest of time, but all the newer countries that are coming in, particularly countries like the Netherlands, Namibia, Kenya, all these countries, they're really not made for test match cricket. All the cricketers have been brought up playing one-day cricket and 2020 cricket. When you play in the leagues in Holland, going back to 97 and 98 when I played over there, it was all 40 over cricket. So they've never played a 4-day game or a 3-day game even. So it's very hard for them to then try to develop a team where you're going to play a 4 or 5 day game. It's just not going to happen for them.
I read somewhere that you were firmly against the kind of proliferation of drop-in pitches and making for kind of bland cricket. How do you think we can redress the imbalance between bat and ball in the modern day game?
Yeah, I don't know. I know they're trying to do it by introducing the juke ball around the world because it has a bigger rope on it for a seam. But then I think that ball swings too much. So that really throws it back in the favour of the bowlers a little bit too much. I don't know enough about soil and grass and stuff to give you a proper answer, but the fact that it sits in really just a 12-inch pan, whereas in a traditional pitch gets to sit in the ground and it bakes and dries and cracks to the shape of whatever earth it sits in. When you sit something in a pan, it just becomes baked into that pan. So really you've got a 12-inch box that you've grown some grass in and you've compacted the dirt and they're so hard that it's not going to crack and break up as much as it should. But having watched cricket the last couple of years, the little that I have watched on these drop-in pitches, it does seem like they've worked a way around it because because you do see more bowlers' foot marks now in these pitches. You do see them crumbling a little bit more than they did 15 or 20 years ago. So maybe they are starting to get them to the stage where they look more realistic.
And it wouldn't be a podcast without me sort of taking a selfish Australian perspective. So, Colin, please do indulge me for 30 seconds. The Australian national team's starting to look very strong again with the return of Smith and Warne. But our bowling unit's been fantastic. But are we still searching, do you think, for a fifth bowling option? Do we need an all-rounder in that Australian squad to go to the next level and take it to that kind of 99, 2000s type era where Australia were quite clearly the best cricket side in the world?
Yeah, I think if you go back through history, most of the best teams in the world have had a really good all-rounder in there. So you can say, well, Australia didn't have one for a while. Well, we had Adam Gilchrist. So we could keep a batsman who could score 100 in a session without thinking about it. So he was really our all-rounder. But we also had Mark Waugh, who could bowl a bit of medium pace, a bit of spin. We had Steve Waugh, who could bowl medium pace and spin. So we had a bunch of all-rounders in that team in that era, but not your traditional celebrity all-rounder like a Jacques Cullis or a Gary Sobers or anything or a Andrew Flintoff. We didn't have one of those all-rounders, but we had a couple of other guys who were pretty handy with bat and ball as well. I think in the Australian setup, and it surprised me that we don't have one, because really back, when I was coming through club cricket and into the state squad and into playing first-class cricket, you're a batsman or you're a bowler. If you're a bowler, you batted last in the nets, or you batted first in the nets, so they could test out the nets and see how bouncy they were with all the new rocks running around, or you didn't get a bat at all. These days, from the advent of the academy in Australia way back 30 odd years ago now, all the bowlers were taught how to bat, and I'm just surprised me that we don't have a plethora of all-rounders running around with all the ability they have now to hit the ball as far as they do and bowl as often as they do in 2020 cricket. It's just, I think, the fact that the skill that they learn now is suited to the limited over game. It's not suited to bowling a 10-over spell. So I think there are all-rounders in Australia that could do a good job in 2020 cricket, and they do. We see it every day. And in one-day cricket, we see that every day as well. But they can't bowl more than 10 overs. I think that's where the problem lies.
Interesting.
Well, Colin, we typically finish the podcast with a little bit of a rundown and some quick fire questions. So I'm going to open up with, what was the favourite spell that you bowled?
Good question. In Adelaide against the West Indies, I got 10 for in the game. So getting 10 for and being a man of the match in the Adelaide Test was great fun.
Who was the batter that you had in your pocket? Who was your favourite person to bowl to? Always got them out.
Not many. there weren't many. I just got a lot of different people out.
You got Lara 5 or 6 times, I think.
I got Lara 6 times in one season, but he also made about 700 runs.
Yeah. And was he the hardest player to bowl at, or was there someone else that you felt more challenging?
There was a bunch of guys. I mean, it really, in the first class cricket that we spoke about earlier, the first class cricket in Australia was exceptionally strong. World cricket was, I think, really strong during that era as well. So every team had 4 or 5 really good batsmen. So just playing Test match cricket and bowling in Test match cricket and in first class cricket in Australia during the 90s and early 2000s was just a challenge every day.
Who was your favourite bowler to bowl in tandem with?
Glenn McGrath, obviously, because all they're trying to do is keep him out the other end, so they're going to try to score a few. But in Tasmania, I can't go without mentioning Mark Ridgway. He was my fellow opening bowler. He's about 67 years old now, I think. I think he was 45 when he's made his debut. But Ridgie was bowled off 5 steps and was as quick as anyone in Australia for about 2 years there.
And you mentioned enjoying having a little bit of fun at the end of the innings, plenty of sixes out of the ground. What was your favourite innings that you played?
Curtly Ambrose in the West Indies in Antigua. I got 46. I should have made a Test match 100. Myself and Steve Waugh put on 50. I got 46 in them. I think the other 4 were leg buyers. So Stephen just avoided the strike for the time I was out there. And I saw off Ambrose, I saw off Walsh, I saw off the first change quick, and then Jimmy Adams came on and got me out. And one guy within 50 metres of the bat, and I hit it straight down his throat off a long hop.
Yeah. So he wouldn't probably rank as the hardest bowler you ever faced then, but who was, I guess, who was the toughest person you faced in your Test career?
In my test career, no one that really bothered me a lot, and I know that sounds arrogant to say from a tail ender, but when you play test match cricket, the wickets get better and better as you bat. So I never really feared anybody. The guy that scared me more than anyone in my whole life was Merv Hughes, playing first-class cricket. Merv and I grew up almost together, played club cricket together, and Merv promised that he would never try to kill me. But you never trust your mates, do you? So every time I had to face Merv, to his credit, he never tried to kill me, but he scared the hell out of me every time. He's the only person I ever backed away from playing cricket.
And we've got a...
Was he quick? Was he that quick?
Merv was maybe his time the fastest bowler in Australia by a long way, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I remember in club cricket, I used to stand at first slip, and we played a game against St Kilda at Junction Oval, which was one of the flattest wickets in Melbourne. And our wicketkeeper was probably the length of the pitch back, and I was another 4 yards back from him. So we were probably almost 30 yards behind the stumps. And the wicket was taking him at head height every ball.
Wow.
Yeah. And talking of teammates, if you were having to have one of your teammates in your COVID-19 isolation with you now, who would that be and why?
I go on well with Stewie McGill. Stewie's good fun. Stewie's an interesting character. He's really, really intelligent, really smart, really hard guy to argue with because he was actually right most of the time. But also loved to have a beer, loved to tell stories, and was good fun to hang out with. And we roomed together a couple of times. So I'd say Stewie. And
he's really into his wine as well, isn't he, Stuart McGill, I think?
He is, yeah.
What was the favourite ground you ever played at?
I loved Adelaide Oval because I played first class cricket there, and then a test match in Adelaide is very intimate. But also being a Victorian, I got to play a Boxing Day test. So I'd have to say a split between Adelaide Oval and the MCG.
Awesome. And a question we ask of every guest, what's the best sledge you ever heard or were part of in your career?
I know I get asked this question a lot, and I have a really bad answer because I know I wasn't a person who sledged people, and then I was a bowler, so I fielded at fine leg most of my life. So I never really got to be around the inner sanctum of what was happening with the short leg and the slips and the keeper they were talking about. So I don't really have a great sledge for you, and I'm sorry because I wish I should, but I don't have one.
No worries.
I never sledged anybody, so nobody ever sledged me. So I was the nice happy guy out there all the time.
Look, that's the most common answer we've got in about 20 interviews. No one will dish any real dirt. Well, Colin,
the only ones that come up is Mark War.
Mark War, lots and lots. Yeah.
Yeah. Merv Hughes has 1,000 of them.
Well, we'll have to try and reach out to him and get Merv on for a few sledges. What's your proudest moment looking back at your career now?
Seeing the look on my parents' face when I got picked to play for Australia. There's a funny story, if you don't mind me telling you. We were playing in Pakistan, and I just gotten a cell phone. So I'm in my first Test series, and Mum and Dad were part of this over 50s club I went to, and they played table tennis and played cards and bake scones and drink cups of tea or whatever they were doing there. And they were having a function one afternoon, and I'd just been picked for the first Test in Pakistan, and the MC at this function that my mum and dad were at introduced my dad as the father of Colin Miller, the Australian Test cricketer. And apparently my dad got there really proud. He just waved to the crowd for like 5 minutes and then made like a 15-minute speech of how proud he was. So things like that, as an athlete, because any kid that's played sport, your parents have driven you all over the countryside to your weekend games, to representative games, or your practice sessions that you got to go to. So I think the reward for your parents. I have a couple of great photos of me and Mum when I broke the record in Australia for most first-class wickets. Dad was a cricket umpire by that stage, so Dad couldn't be at the ground, the MCG. So Mum sat there every time I played a game in Melbourne. Mum would be there. So she saw me break that record as well. It's a proud moment for me.
Awesome. Well, Colin, look, thank you so much for your time on the podcast. I hope over the course of the next few weeks things quieten down a little bit in Las Vegas with regard to COVID, and you can get back back out to work and onto the strip. But look, thank you very much for taking the time to reminisce through your career. I know for all of us here, we kind of grew up in that sort of late 90s, early 2000s watching cricket. So it's been awesome to talk about with you.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time.